Good morning, team. Here we all are. BHN for another day. Producer George and Chewy. How you guys doing today?
Good,
Right.
mate.
Rocking and rolling.
Yeah, weather better than yesterday here in Dunedin. I'm starting to get the winter is coming blues.
That's true, actually. I was just thinking that's an interesting thought that even though we're all remote, the three of us are in Dunedin. This is like the Dunedin special. So today we've got a pretty jam-packed show. We're going to start shortly with a conversation that I had with Tom Mutch. I spoke to him last night because Tom Mutch is in Ukraine right now, and we have to fit around his timetable, as selfish as that sounds from someone in a war zone. So I managed to grab a hold of Tom last night. We had a bit of a chat, and all sorts of things are covered off, including some of the things that are talked about in the media today to do with, is this a ceasefire or not? Are the Russians really offering a ceasefire, or is this just cover for something else? That's included in this conversation. And actually, I guess if we had gone live last night, probably would have been the first place you heard about the accusations of perhaps not, but also the reason why. So that's coming up in this. Also, we're going to have a chat today about this brand new report from the Commerce Commission coming out about prices in supermarkets and are they gouging us? Siouxsie Wiles has had a complaint upheld against her to do with some accusations she made towards academics. We'll be having a chat about that. And I have a response from Siouxsie. I don't know if any other media outlets have any feedback from Siouxsie about that, but I was communicating with her over text and she sent me a response and I asked if we could use the response and she said, yes, sure, fine, you can use the response. So we'll be doing that as well. Maybe a little bit Omicron and we'll see what else pops up during the show. Anything to kick off with you two, or are we good to go?
Let's crack on.
Let's crack on. So this is a conversation that I had a few hours ago with Tom Mutch, and we will all mic our microphone so we won't be doing farty noises in the background while this very important conversation goes on. As you hear my chat with Tom from last night, let's just play it out. Here it comes. From the Ukraine, Tom Mutch joins us again. Tom, good morning New Zealand time to you.
Yeah, and good morning here as well. Quite a relaxing morning, probably the most relaxing I've had in a while.
Yeah, I'm very glad to have caught up with you again. I thought what we might just very quickly do is show people where you are because you've moved. We've talked to you. I don't think we ever got you in Kiev. I think you and I were communicating when you were in Kiev, but then we spoke to you when you were in Lviv. So I wanted to show people a bit more about where you've been. So here, Ukraine is here, massive body. Obviously, Kiev is here in the center, which we're talking about. When we talked to you, you were in Lviv, but since then, and we'll talk about this shortly, you told us you were going to go back east, and you have been back to Kiev, which I want to talk to you about. But right now, you're down in this region here.
Exactly. I'm staying at a friend's house here.
And is that region that's still in the western part of Ukraine,
still in the western part
in a war zone, say, still fairly safe though?
More well, that people do say they hear the air raid sirens and stuff here, but I'm not aware that there's been any kind of fighting or damage in this particular area. But when I came on the train, there were a few places that had been hit quite recently and not too far from here.
Right. I'm interested as to actually your daily movements. I've actually got your Twitter feed. I'll bring another picture back up as well. I've got your Twitter feed here, which, as I said to you last time, I'm fairly addicted to at the moment. This is a photo that you put out the other day, or you tweeted out with some other reporters out there. This is not supposed to sound flippant, obviously, but you look a bit like a tourist because the other guys are in flak jackets and helmets and army gear, and you've got your jeans and sort of a hoodie on. Is there an actual reason for that? Are you trying to like be less conspicuous, or is that just how you roll?
To be perfectly honest, and everyone makes their own determinations about this, is about where they wear the kind of the gear and the body armor. I don't like to do it what we're talking about here, we're talking about an outpost, but we're not talking about a contested front line. I prefer to leave the sort of the armor and the stuff until I'm actually there, right? Like until I actually need it. One, I think it looks a bit fancy. it limits your mobility a little bit. And third, I think it sometimes it makes a little bit of a divide between you and the people you're with.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
said, like we all throw them on and throw them off at various times, but I can see then even then I do look a tiny bit out of place. But that where we are now is not super dangerous area.
Speaking of throwing them on and throwing them off, one of the questions I want to talk to you about, and I'm sure if you haven't seen this, you've heard this, but the footage from the Sky News reporters coming under fire. Have you seen or heard of this?
I have definitely, we've all heard about this.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I just don't know kind of what access you've got to what information at what time. We talked about this in yesterday's show and showed this video, so I'm not going to show the video again per se, but for people who weren't here, Sky News reporters were talking about Russian death squads, and they claim that they've come under attack by Russian you can see bullet ricochets there as we're watching this, by these Russian death squads. I guess from this side of the world, I've got to kind of say, we haven't had, I don't know if that's been confirmed or not, but I was interested for a couple of things for you. The first is, are you able to speak to this idea of Russian death squads being out there or not? And I'm also interested, you went back to Kiev. You must be going through areas that either are under attack or have been under attack. And have you had any scary moments at the moment for yourself?
Alrighty, so as you know, so basically just to give a background on my movements, I spent the first 4 days or so, about 4 days in Kiev when it started out. Then we decided to leave because we were really worried. Basically, the Russians were going to encircle the town and cut off all the escape routes.
Right.
Now that offensive has since completely stalled. So yes, there are still safe routes in and out of Kiev. Honestly, I've been using the trains, and the trains have been working absolutely fine, no problems. Nobody expected that to happen, but it's what has happened. And so, for instance, there's that famous 40-mile convoy that's been stuck on the road outside of Kiev for ages. Well, it looks like they're having fuel problems. It looks like they're having generator problems. And basically, that doesn't seem to be doing very much. So for now, it's still not that difficult to get in and out of Kiev, which is very, very lucky for me and for my colleagues who are still there. And I probably will be going back to Kiev if it's safe to do so within the next week. Now, as for this idea of death squads, so what people have been worried about is what they call infiltration units, which are basically saboteurs that kind of enter the city. We know that a number of them supposedly were looking for President Zelensky, trying to hunt him down. And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to move into the city in very, very small numbers and basically be able to conduct kind of sabotage raiding operations. Now, what we think happened there, and I speak not being able to confirm these facts, this is what I heard from someone who is in touch with them, is that because they were wearing helmets and they were filming outside, they were filming in a car, that someone thought, oh, it was a soldier with a gun, because you look and you just might not know. You see someone with a shiny object pointing it out a window and they've got a helmet on. You've got a split-second reflex, soldiers can open fire, right? Now, were they targeted because they were journalists? Quite possibly. Quite possible they were mistaken for military. At this point, we just don't know.
Yeah. Oh, look, I think it's fair to put out there. I kind of said it sort of, not without the background knowledge of contact you've had with people who know people, but I kind of said, for me, it's until something is confirmed, it's an allegation. And whilst it might be an accurate allegation, we don't know yet. Because I guess that also bodes the question, are you safe as press? Even though you're in a war zone and you're going in and out of Kiev and you're now further west, we saw that picture of the Ukrainian woman giving the soldier sunflower seeds. Have you had any interactions as press with Russian soldiers? Would you be safe if you came across Russian soldiers? Or am I speaking a naive safety about a war zone, not knowing anything that's going on?
No, it's a very, very legitimate question. So I haven't come across or had any interactions with Russian troops. I'm aware of a couple of occasions where reporters have, and there were, when the first attack on the airbase came in, I think I think it was a CNN crew got out there, and the Russians allowed them to come around and film for a couple of minutes. I was shocked to hear they allowed. Now, honestly, it completely depends. If you run into, say, a disciplined, organized Russian military commander who knows your press and doesn't want to cause an international scandal, you'll probably be fine. What if you happen to run into some kind of hungry, starving conscripts who are out in the middle of nowhere and want to rob you for what you've got on you? Then you're definitely not safe. What if they don't know your press? Or remember, these guys are, yes, journalists are protected under the international laws of war. What if the people you're with, one, just don't care, or two, they don't know, because a lot of these Russian soldiers are like 18-year-old conscripts. They don't know anything about the Geneva Convention or what they're supposed to be doing. They probably, I imagine the order's been given, don't hurt journalists. That doesn't mean it's going to be followed or enforced.
Yeah, and also, even if it was, I mean, it's war. As soon as you hear the idea of civilians dying, you know that there are, as silly as it sounds, rules of war not being engaged with anyway. So who says those rules are going to be followed for journalists? It makes me just think, though, again, bouncing off the back of what you've just said, there's reports coming out, and this is from the Daily Mirror. I'll read it out for people. It says it's an exclusive about the Russian forces losing morale. This article says former British Army General Chief Lord Dammit tells the Sunday Mirror, this would have been last night, that Russian officers have been abandoning their soldiers in order to save their own skins, as he accuses Russia of a moral and military failure of the highest order. Now, on one level, I go, that sounds like the propaganda game from the other side, but you're there. Are you hearing stories? Are you seeing incidents where, I mean, we are hearing about some soldiers just kind of giving up and literally being given a phone to call their mums, but is this happening en masse over there, as you understand? Are Russian 18-year-olds, conscripts, just putting down their arms and walking away, or are we getting the 1% good stories to try and build the morale of the West, so to speak?
So it's a little bit of both. You've always got to be careful, yes, because it's very, very easy to take a story from a war zone and be like, this is what it's like all over the country. I'm going to actually take an example from another war, which was that the evacuation of Kabul last year. Just to give you an idea of what happens. Now, I wasn't there in Afghanistan. I came to Afghanistan about a month and a half later, and I spoke to a lot of my colleagues and I was like, wow, living through the fall of Kabul must have been absolutely crazy. We all saw the scenes on TV, and they were like, no, it actually really wasn't. It was really calm. It was just the airport that was chaos, but the rest of the country was actually pretty normal. And so this gives you an idea of like often what the media, and I say this as a journalist myself, what the media will do is we will take those stories and we will publish them and they will be completely true, but they don't necessarily go across the whole country. So it's definitely been reports of I've heard a lot that like Russian soldiers are having very, very poor morale and that they are deserting, but it doesn't seem they're deserting in enough numbers to make a meaningful military difference yet. That being said, there are a lot of sensible reasons for why the Russian soldiers would have no morale. Most Russian soldiers don't want to be fighting and killing Ukrainians.
For sure.
But, if they're, say, in Syria, it's very easy for them to be like, oh, these are all terrorists and they don't care or whatever, regardless of the rights or the wrongs of that situation. Here in Ukraine, they've all got family in Ukraine. They've all, they speak very similar languages. They've been told this is, they're the Slavic Brotherhood or whatever. And now you're expected to kind of kill these people in effectively cold blood. A lot of the conscripts we understand weren't even told they were going to a war. They were told they were going on exercises, and then all of a sudden they're given a rifle and said, go to Ukraine, take over Kiev. And it was just like, seems like that there's been a catastrophe. And of course, the Ukrainians, on the other hand, are extremely determined. And, they were probably the Russian soldiers were just told, oh, yeah, you're going to liberate these people from this crazed government. You'll be welcomed with open arms. And then all of a sudden they come into this extremely fierce resistance. At the first ambush, I think that kind of idea gives off. They realize how much they've been lied to by their superiors, and at the desertions, they make sense.
Yeah, wow, it's just a shocking story all round. You said you went back east. You went to Kiev. I'd be interested to know what your take on Kiev was at the moment. When we first saw the stories 10 days ago or so, and that was the focus of the Russian army to get in there and take control. You've just been in. You've just been out. What was your experiences in Kiev?
So Kiev is calmer now. Like at first it was kind of mass not panic, but like very kind of chaotic. Everyone was very, very scared. No one knew what would happen. No one, we were hearing reports the city's going to fall in 48 hours. The Russians are coming tonight. They're putting all of their men behind it. Now things have kind of eased into a bit more of a kind of an equilibrium. Most of the people who were going to leave, they've now had the chance to leave. As I said, the trains were still working. I got on my train. I got to my train station 10 minutes before the train left, and I was able to just walk on and get a seat.
Right.
So those who are going to stay are going to stay. And so what's now happening is it's basically, everyone who isn't a journalist, everyone's picked up a rifle. There's military preparations all over the streets, sandbags, tank traps, snipers in the windows, everything like that. And so it's just they've really, really prepared the city like much, much better than they had a few days ago. Now in the center of Kiev, it's pretty quiet. You hear the occasional air raid siren, the occasional kind of missile going over your head, but it seems like the Ukrainian anti-aircraft's holding up really well, and none of them have managed to really smash into Kiev yet, and they're all shot down. Now, on the outskirts of Kiev, which I went to briefly, that photo you posted before, that was actually taken just after we got back from those outskirts, or kind of close to those outskirts. There's a lot of fierce fighting going on there. Like even from that position where we were, we could hear chat, 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 like this kind of small arms fire going for like minutes at a time in the background, probably 3 or 4 kilometers away. There's a lot of armed men there. They're pretty tense. They're pretty nervous. But at the same time, they don't look like the kind of soldiers who look like they're fighting an unwinnable war. The morale is still pretty high.
Well, we talked about that. I mean, this is the third time you've been on, thankfully. We talked about that, and maybe the first time is that you've got a bunch of Ukrainians who are battle hardened on that eastern border from fighting Russian separatists for the past decade. Now against a bunch, I'm sure there's more than just 18-year-old, but a bunch of 18-year-old conscripts who kind of don't want to be there. So, it's like smaller force with more heart and passion for it, larger force of boys who don't really want to be there. What's going to happen? And I guess that's part of the reason they're holding the line on some level.
I think that's definitely true. The thing is, it is a bit of a Hollywood story, but it's also it also fits the facts as we know them. So just because it's a nice narrative, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's completely wrong.
I know how you say it is a Hollywood story. I'm just thinking, as long as Ben Affleck doesn't get involved like he did with Argo and completely fuck it up, that'll be fine on the big screen once we're done. I'm going to bring up that map again that we were at. So
but Sean Penn was here. Sean Penn spent about 2 weeks in Kiev, including, as we understand, during the war. So.
Oh, well, there you go. You were talking about getting into Kiev, and you were talking about around the outskirts of it, and talking about to the west of Kiev. I'm just hovering over Kiev for people to see it right now. I'm wondering about the east of Kiev, between Kiev and Russia, what it's like. And this would be an appropriate time to ask you, down there in the southeastern part of the Ukraine that I'm hovering now, if people can see their screen, there was supposed to be a ceasefire to allow, I think it was up to 10,000 civilians out. That ended up sort of not being a ceasefire. I'd like to know from you, what's life like between Kiev and Russia, so east of Kiev, and if you've got any thoughts, if you heard anything, any inside word on what actually happened with that supposed ceasefire.
Alrighty. So anything east of the Dnieper River, which is that big river which kind of cuts Kiev in half, and is considered by a lot of people to be where the Russians want to take up to. I'm speaking from secondhand knowledge, so I don't necessarily know myself. I haven't been there yet. Well, I've been to the Kiev side, but I haven't been to the east. So we understand that things are pretty difficult in most of those places. Kharkiv, which is a city like kind of an eastern city, very close to the Russian border. That's one of the cities that's been taking the most fire. Like, this is the place where, dozens, up to hundreds of civilians have been killed by sort of unguided Russian artillery or airstrikes. That place has been going pretty hard. A couple of colleagues just got back from there, and they said it was really, really, really rough. And another few colleagues I know just got out of Mariupol, which is where this humanitarian corridor was supposed to be formed. But a lot of people are worried about the idea of a humanitarian corridor, just because what that could do is that could give the Russians an excuse to say, okay, we let civilians leave. Anyone who stays there is a Nazi or a saboteur or whatever, and give them kind of an excuse to blow the hell out of the place. It's like, that's what they did in Syria, right? They said anyone who stayed is a jihadist. So we have carte blanche to just go all out. So there's a lot of mistrust on the Ukrainian side for whether these humanitarian corridors actually go through or not. I'm not privy to the exact details, but that's what I understand the thinking is. And I actually will be traveling to the south within the next couple of days to the city of Odessa, which is kind of where a lot of people expect another Russian offensive to be in the next few days.
All right. I was wondering, in that area in the west that you've been traveling to those borders through some of your days. Have you been recently to any of the borders, and do you know what's happening with the humanitarian aid and efforts at the borders at the moment?
So it kind of waxes and wanes. I first went to the border. I'm kind of losing track of the days here, but I believe it was last Wednesday or Thursday. But kind of everything just kind of blurs into one. And it was the first day was a really, really bad situation. Like, and I don't mean this as like an attack on like the Ukrainian or the Polish border guards or the efforts or whatever. But you know, when you're talking about trying to get 1.5 million people over a border in a week and a half, it's like, yeah, there's going to be problems, right? There's going to be just logistical problems. And there were like people who'd been there. Literally, most of them, I have to be honest, were like, you know, kind of immigrants. I met people from Rwanda, from Eritrea, from Nigeria, Congo, India, Pakistan, and they were kind of given like a lower priority. They were still getting through, but it was taking like 3-4 days. Some of them had literally been kind of sleeping to some of their jackets, and were like really, really cold and tired and hungry. And some of them had to be taken to hospital when they got to the Polish side. And now I did go back to, this was the Polish border, and I did go back there the next day, and the situation had eased. Most of those people had passed through and been able to cross. But then I heard a couple of days later that it was chaos all over again by a friend who went back there. So yeah, it just kind of waxes and wanes depending on the situation. But I do understand it's easing up a little bit over time.
As your role as a journalist, obviously you're speaking to Ukrainian people. I was wondering of a couple of things. The first was, what news are the Ukrainian people getting about support for them around the rest of the world? I mean, are they hearing things like the article I got up at the moment, that there is anti-war protests going on in Russia right now, where anti-war Russian protesters are getting arrested, 4,500 taken away, in support of the Ukrainian people, or I guess you could say at the very least against the Russian invasion of? Are the locals hearing that? Do they know?
Look, yeah. So one of the things about Ukraine that makes it an interesting war to cover is that you're talking about a society that is deeply, deeply digitally native. Like everybody here is connected to the internet, uses Instagram, TikTok, you know, whatever kind of social media platform they use, and is consuming news absolutely constantly. I mean, as I said, one of the craziest moments for me was literally being in that bunker on the second day, and everyone just had their phone out and was just scrolling Instagram to see what was happening with their family, Twitter to see what the news was. So yeah, they know like pretty much what's going on. And Ukraine, especially for post-Soviet countries, has like a pretty remarkably free press as far as things go. I'm not saying it's perfect. There have definitely been press freedom issues, but nothing on the scale that you've seen in Russia or Belarus or Kazakhstan or any of the other kind of post-Soviet countries. So yes, Ukrainians know what's going on. Do they? A lot of them I've asked about this thing in Russia. Some of the people are very supportive. Some people say, you know, we don't really have that much sympathy for them. We're the ones who are going to die here. Yeah. One Ukrainian put it to me being like, if you're not protesting, you're complicit. So I won't make the judgment call there, but that seemed to be, if you're not protesting, you're not risking something to try and stop this invasion, you're complicit. So that, I would say, would be the majority opinion.
Because I was also thinking about, like, I'm seeing footage of, you know, liquor shops in London tipping out all their Russian vodka. And in fact, I even heard a story today, as minimizing as it sounds, of some university students from Otago going into a local fruit shop and seeing that some of the product was Ukrainian, so they bought it. They bought the product in the fruit shop just because it was Ukrainian. What, I don't even know what it would be, but they did it. So it's, yeah, I was just wondering if they get the vibe that the world is with them, and it sounds like what you're saying is that they do.
Well, yes and no. So yes, they get the vibe the world is with them.
Yeah.
But okay, put it this way, like, you know, in what way does it help the Ukrainian military situation about a bunch of bartenders in London pouring Russian vodka?
Yeah. So you're saying where are the American jets? If you're with us, where are the American jets?
Exactly. It's like they're like, okay, these are nice symbolic actions.
Yeah.
where the hell is the military support, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the funniest one, I'm sorry, I know we don't want to make light of it, was like something like the International Cat Federation was having like a cat beauty contest and banned Russian cats from entering. I mean, some of this stuff is pretty ridiculous. And I don't think there's any Ukrainians who really believe that something like that is going to make any sort of difference.
I think I saw on our news tonight, New Zealand's just announced sanctions, etc., freezing assets of Russian oligarchs in New Zealand. I saw a story about a $40 million like housing resort from a Russian oligarch in New Zealand that's been frozen. There's a list of 100 people that now can't travel through or have money come through New Zealand from Russia. And also on the jets, I think what I saw, if you haven't heard this, maybe you have, is that one of the things that is being suggested is that perhaps Poland, because America doesn't want to get involved necessarily at the moment, because that basically is then announcing a war against Russia, be that right or wrong. This is I understand it. So they're talking about having Poland give Ukraine their jets, and then America giving their jets, like their secondhand jets, to Poland. So they're not directly involved, but a way that perhaps some of those NATO allies can support Ukraine without necessarily aiding it starting World War III. Whether that is right or wrong, good or bad, I don't know, but that's the story I was hearing tonight. Well, when I say story, was being reported tonight on the news.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I don't know. I don't know specifically what's going on there, but that I had heard something similar. The issue, of course, to be perfectly honest, is sure, the jets are all nice and good at the present. How do you get them to Ukraine? Can't try and fly them there. The Russians can shoot them down. Take them across the border. They can, plonk a missile on them. So it's like, yes, I think the jet, something has been agreed, but the problem here is not it's not just the military support, it's the logistics of getting it there, which is also a problem the Russians are having, right? The Russians are having some real logistics problems getting their troops and kind of resupplied and refueled and stuff. So this is an issue that both sides are having.
And there's also talk of the no-fly zone over Ukraine and calling for a no-fly zone. And for people who don't quite understand this, and look, you're the expert, Tom, so you can add to or correct me on this exactly, is that if a no-fly zone is declared, then what happens is the no-fly zone has to be kept, and the only way for a no-fly zone to be kept is that members of NATO have to police it, and if they police it, then what you're going to do is have UK jets, American jets, probably French jets engaging with Russian jets, and then you do have basically a world war. So that's one of the reasons that the no-fly thing is being problematic at the moment, at least so we're being told in the press.
Yes, this is the issue, right? Everyone wants to protect the Ukrainian people from what is pretty, when I can say this as a journalist, it's a pretty heinous act of aggression.
Yeah.
That even the normal fellow slightly alt-right fellow travelers have been very, very quiet at the moment. I've noticed they don't really. I think everyone knows that Russians don't really have a leg to stand on. But yeah, the problem with the no-fly zone is it's like, okay, you want to stop the war in Ukraine. How do you stop the war in Ukraine also escalating, right?
Yeah.
How do you do it so that it doesn't, the Russians don't decide to start dropping, because if NATO gets involved with a no-fly zone, Russia can say, all right, we're at war now, and then they can start dropping bombs in Poland and, the Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and then it's like, where does it stop, right? Yeah. Now, I have heard the ideas kind of floated that the no-fly zone that there could be a kind of a no-fly zone in name only, which would be using the jets that we were talking about before, and that they would be flown under Ukrainian flags by Ukrainian pilots from inside Ukraine, potentially from over the borders, and that would be a kind of a way of doing it kind of by proxy, so that it wasn't an official war, it wasn't officially NATO shooting down, so that it wouldn't necessarily start World War III. I don't know. A lot of this is just pure speculation now, and we can't really know. But yeah, that's the issue with the no-fly zone. Also, it should be noted, the Russians don't have air superiority yet, actually. Most of the Ukrainian anti-air defense is actually holding up pretty well. So I'm not even sure a no-fly zone is the military necessity Ukraine even needs right now.
Right. Hey, Tom, it's always good to chat with you. I'm very, as I said last time, our number one priority is that you and yours are safe and well, and so that's always the priority. But when you can give us time, we really do appreciate it. Is there anything you need to leave us with? I mean, we've had a bit of a 20-25 minute chat now, covered off some of the big headlines of the last few days out of the Ukraine. But is there anything we've missed? Is there anything that's important for people to know today that you can pass on, or are we just going to talk to you in a few days?
I guess I think it's almost more. I'm leaving you with a kind of a shower thought here. Is that, and it's not just for me, but it's for kind of all of my colleagues and for everyone in kind of everyone sort of living through this. Is that it kind of it's quite strange how quickly this becomes somewhat normal, right? I can barely remember what happened before February the 24th, but it's kind of like for most of us, the kind of adrenaline's lowering. We're getting more normal and more used to it. And like when I went out to very near the front lines the other day, we could hear like bullets kind of going off in the distance. And instead of like freaking us out, it was like, oh yeah, it's just another gunfight. That's what life is like now. So yeah, I thought that's kind of an interesting thought to leave you with.
How quickly it becomes the norm. And then then it will end, or you'll move away from it, or you'll be out of the war zone, and you'll be like, it sounds so quiet. Where are those pings I'm used to hearing? Yeah. Well, Tom, look, be safe. It's fantastic that you've given us some time to chat again. I really do appreciate it. We will stay in touch, and hopefully we might catch up with you later on in the week. That is live from Ukraine, New Zealand journalist Tom Mutch. Tom, all the best.
Thank you so much. Speak to you so much.
Well, there you go, lads. And I know neither of you guys have seen that yet, so it'll be a chance for you to respond to what you have heard. As we heard Tom saying there, I saw an article this morning talking about the ceasefire as a bit of a sham coming out of France. They were saying that. But you guys are welcome to share anything. I had the chat last night. What do you guys want to share?
I mean, I was reading this morning, and as you quite rightly said, a lot of the stuff's unconfirmed, but reports of that civilian corridor out of Mariupol being mined by the Russians as they left.
Geez.
So, I mean, this sort of speaks to what we spoke to last week, though, is you don't know. You don't know if they did it. You don't know if the Ukrainians are telling the truth. It's hard. You've got to go, hey, look, both sides have an investment to both versions of this being correct.
Yeah, I guess that's why we like to go to Tom, because even though we're not saying Tom has the answer to every question we want, at least he's there and can go.
He's a hell of a lot closer than we are.
If he hasn't seen it, he's typically first or second hand away from it, whereas you and I and everybody else on whatever country we're in, we have got numerous people to get through before we see it on our TV screens.
Yeah, it's interesting what he said about it becoming normal over there, and it sounds like he was able to move back towards Kiev, so it sounds like front lines are getting sort of solidified, and that sort of actually speaks well for negotiations and that sort of thing. If front lines are sort of becoming established, then it makes it a lot easier to work out the logistics and the geography of humanitarian corridors and this sort of thing. Day 3 of negotiations sort of ended today with not much outcome, except just continue trying to sort out Mariupol humanitarian corridors and this sort of thing. But yeah, it sounds like ceasefires. I mean, in this sort of conflict, and we've talked about how sort of irregular the forces are sometimes, that there'll be proxy forces, there'll be militias and all this sort of thing, especially in the east of the country. I can imagine that makes it a lot harder to have a ceasefire when there's lots of different sorts of chains of command.
Yeah. Whilst that was playing out as well, another comment coming in, the Russian military reforms restructured the army. Their doctrine has 2 echelons. The first are the conscripts to engage and pin down the enemy. Second, after artillery bombardment, are professionals to assault. So I guess that means the 18-year-old conscripts go in first, and then the I was going to say big boys, but I guess in this day and age we say the big boys and girls come in to finish the job. I'm not trying to make it sound like that's what's going to happen here, but that's what this message, I guess, is implying. Yeah, I don't want to make a message. I don't want to put out there that so Russia's about to walk over the Ukraine or over Ukraine. I got a message yesterday as well, George. Just so you know how we're talking about how to say the Ukraine and Ukraine. Someone messaged me yesterday saying the Russians refer to Ukraine as the Ukraine. So even though we've grown up hearing about the Ukraine, when we say the Ukraine, it's annoys Ukrainians because that's how the Russians refer to that area as the Ukraine, as opposed to Ukraine. So I'll do my best. I'm going to keep practicing. Sorry, I interrupted someone.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's funny how important language like that can be. I guess the Ukraine, it makes it sound like it's a sort of geographic area or a sort
region.
Down yonder sort of thing, which, and it is for the Russians, it's a place where they sort of go and holiday and stuff like that. Yeah. As for the sort of military situation and talk of the sort of, you might remember last week we were talking about maybe how Russian hubris was sort of got in the way of that initial assault on Ukraine. I guess now it's long enough for the Russians to sort of recalculate, right, and reassess the situation. And so this is really a moment where we either see an intensification from the Russian forces, or, as I said before, a sort of stagnation of the front lines.
Yes. Shall we have a look at the next thing we were going to talk about today? Shall we move into that?
Yeah.
I just see your screen. Your screen's there. Do you want to share something else, George, or are we moving on?
I was just going to quickly note that New Zealand is moving to. They sort of, as far as sanctions against Russia, New Zealand sort of has to change a bunch of laws in Parliament and this kind of thing, so they can rush them through, because basically they don't want this situation where New Zealand gets used as a place to basically for Russian oligarchs to dump their assets while the rest of the world is moving to sanction them. And basically it just gives the government an ability to freeze Russian assets in New Zealand, prevent movement, and stop super yachts, ships and aircraft from entering New Zealand waters and airspace, as well as a travel ban against about 100 individuals. So I just thought I'd add that.
Also, often it feels like sanctions are a bit of a wet bus ticket, a bit of a toothless monster. But in this instance, it seems to be, at the moment, being pretty effective. I mean, we are hearing reports out of Russia that I saw. Actually, I watched Last Week Tonight with John Oliver last night. I should have brought it up. And there was a business show coming out of Russia where the commentator was toasting to the death of the Russian stock market. He was basically on his show going, this is to the death of the Russian stock market. So the sanctions there seem to be bringing lots of business and industry to a halt. So maybe this is going to be one of those instances where sanctions, as opposed to ground troops, are going to be the best thing to bring an end to this.
Yeah, I think especially when with global, even for isolated countries, they still rely totally on an interconnected global financial network, right? And so if you can bring a stop to that, and actually, and tomorrow we'll be talking about sports sanctions actually as well. But yeah, if you can actually bring an end to that sort of thing, then yeah, definitely it's going to have an effect. There's also even talk of McDonald's and places like this pulling out of Russian markets.
I mean, the big one from the other day was MasterCard and Visa.
Yeah.
Pulling out. They've never done something like that.
Netflix as well has pulled out.
Yep. And I think, I guess the takeaway that I'd say is as much as people may sort of go, oh, sanctions aren't enough, I'd much rather we try sanctions first before dropping bombs and sending kids over.
No, and I think possibly we talked about this from day one, George, that you've got billionaire oligarchs over there. As soon as you start hitting their bottom line, it's not going to take many of them to probably push back on Putin. Not that that's going to end well for either Putin or the oligarchs, but you affect my bottom line. That's going to be a sticking point for it doesn't take many billionaires to get together to be able to figure something out behind the scenes or behind the iron wall, so to speak, to move someone on, shall we say, without making any accusations. Hey, we are going to move on, guys, because we want to get to the Commerce Commission, and we do want to get to the Media Council in the next 20 minutes. So let's bring up the story about the reports today from the Commerce Commission. The Commerce Commission has reported basically a bit of a well, it feels to me a bit like broadcasting standards. From someone who's worked in a broadcasting world, broadcasting standards was always seen as a bit of a toothless monster that you could actually get like a strike against you for doing something naughty on the radio, but they actually had no power to do anything. And it seems that the Commerce Commission has come out going, this is not working all that well, made some recommendations, but actually haven't made any absolute decisions for any change to happen. Recommendations are one thing, but no changes seem afoot from this.
Yeah, sorry.
You go, George.
Yeah, one of the main sort of sticking points that seems to be happening with making changes to the grocery industry is the fact that, and the commission basically all but said this, is that there's a duopoly, right? That there's two companies that basically have a hold over that industry, and that it's very, and again, the commission is saying this in this latest report, that it's very difficult for anyone that isn't Woolworths, NZ, and Foodstuffs to come in and sort of increase that competition. And the report seems especially interested in the sort of the fact that it's not just these two companies that have control over the retail end of this industry, but also the supplier end of this industry. But they stopped short of recommendations about sort of actually structurally playing with that how that is organized, how they control both supplier and retail end of it. In fact, their recommendations were really, according to experts and commentators, sort of didn't even, they didn't really stick to their guns based on what earlier drafts of the report were.
Yeah, and David Clark has already come out with a message today. Maybe we'll try and get David on tomorrow to see if we can have a chat with him about it, being the Minister for Commerce. But they could have made recommendations up to and including, that these guys are forced to sell off some of their stock. So, because at the moment they own 80% of the market, these two companies, they could have been forced to downsize and give someone an actual inroad into it. They didn't do that. For me, that kind of goes one of two ways. And the first is that a fair thing to do to a business who's built up? I mean, I get that I want cheaper prices and I want to have free and equal access, but I was thinking about it as I said. Yeah, I know my camera's gone down, guys. I'm sorry, something going on with it. I'll get to it in a sec. But if I move, I'll lose my mic as well. It's like if I built up a company and it had complete domination of an area, and then I got told, well, that's not fair, you got to sell a third of it off. I'd be a bit about it as well. But the Commerce Commission is saying the current situation is not working, it's not fair, so something's got to happen, but they stopped short of saying this now will happen. That's, I guess, the frustrating part from this.
I think the thing that I pulled out of that story is it's not even the fact that they'd be forced to sell some of their supermarkets, it's their land banking as well. They'll buy up commercial space where it would be a good place to put a supermarket and just sit on it. Just to stop anybody else doing it, and that to me is crazy. If they've got the money to essentially just park it in the ground, all of this crying poor by these massive companies. I mean, it's crazy to think the amount of food that New Zealand produces, that we are paying some of the prices that we are when we export just so much. Why is anybody hungry in this country is a mystery to me.
Yeah, there's always that argument. Why does the milk come from 23 kilometers down the road or whatever? Yet I pay 30% more than what they pay in Sydney for it. So that's always the conversation.
I once got a steak, New Zealand steak, far cheaper in Malaysia than we could get it here. The math on that doesn't work.
Yeah, apparently grocery prices are very high by international standards, and the profitability of the retailers is high by international standards as well. So the margin, the profit margin is huge. And like, I think just in terms of economic philosophy, a government must intervene when there is a monopoly, when there is a duopoly or whatever. I think that's kind of where I stand as a lefty on economics, is that the government has the right to intervene, especially when people can't afford food.
Oh, exactly, and especially if companies go, oh well, we don't want government regulation. Well, that's the threat. Regulate yourselves before the government gets involved. And maybe this is the part where the government or the Commerce Commission is signaling you guys need to get your ducks in order before we drop the hammer. Protect your profits, stop us bringing in somebody else. But yeah, I agree with your first point, Pat. It does seem quite toothless.
Yeah, I mean, it's for me, I can see both sides. I mean, obviously I want better pricing. I want it to be fairer for everybody, especially those who can't afford it. But equally, like we have here in Dunedin, I don't know, I always get confused with it, but was it Kmart? There was one on the top of the one of those malls and off
yeah, that was
Broad
Kmart.
Street. Was it Kmart? And everyone loved it, and everyone went there. My kids were there like every third day, spending $4 on utter shit straight out of China. But everyone seemed to love it. And then it left that place and it couldn't find somewhere else to go. So it's got nowhere in Dunedin. The story that I heard, and it's just a story, I don't know if it's true, is that one of our warehouses, as in the warehouse, shut down in central Dunedin. But they chose, now this is alleged, this is a rumor, I don't know if this is accurate, but they chose to stay in that building and keep paying their lease and use it just as basically a pickup zone rather than leave to keep Kmart from finding another location in Dunedin. Now, whether that's true or not true, it's a little bit like the land banking, Chewy. It's like businesses making decisions to keep others out for their own profit. I can see that as someone who runs a business, but I also want a fair response, and I want it fair for not just me, but for people who when the cheapest food is typically also the worst food for you, that's like the beginning of good or bad health in the country. And so I'd love to see that fixed as much as possible, but I guess I have no power in that. I don't know how that's going to be fixed. I wish the Commerce Commission had some more teeth or some more direction, because it feels like they've just kind of gone, yeah, it needs to be fixed. Meh. So without doing it. Also, Simon's here messaged us as well saying, it'd be great if the government did a tax incentive to the international supermarket of Aldi and Lid, don't know what those are, or other brands. Be great to encourage them to come to New Zealand. So
I know those two brands from Europe, and they were good. For what it counts as well, I've heard that story about the warehouse in central Dunedin as well.
But that's because rumors spread around the world faster than truth can get its pants on, Joey. Who knows?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, I want to move on, because this last story is one that's probably going to require us to have a little bit of time too. In fact, George, I'm going to kind of throw to you to lead this one a little bit, because you were doing the research on this and the lead up to it. I've done some of the background to this, but it's a little bit, there's a story. It's not necessarily about Siouxsie Wiles, but it's involving Siouxsie Wiles. So there was and I bought the actual, where did I put it? I bought it across so we could have a look at it. There was an article written, there was a proposal within, and George, you'll correct me if I'm wrong here, but there was a proposal within a curriculum of New Zealand for schools to include Maturanga Māori as a part of a science curriculum. There were 7 academics who are now known as the Listener 7 or something like that, who wrote a letter to the listener and all signed it. And I just want to read one paragraph from it, and then I'll throw to you, George. They talked about their opposition to Maturanga Māori being included in this For this reason, they say it includes the following description as part of the new course. So this is a quote from the new NCEA document, that
A working document, I should say.
Working document. Thank you. But this was one of the proposed aspects to include Maturanga Māori in there as well. They say of Western science. That's how they refer to it. That quote, it promotes discussion. Oh, sorry, this is of Maturanga Māori. This is what they say. They say, quote, it promotes discussion and analysis of the ways in which science has been used to support the dominance of Eurocentric views, among which is used as a rationale for colonization of Māori and the suppression of Māori knowledge, and the notion that science is a Western European invention. Scroll it down a little bit. Western European invention, and itself evidence of European dominance over Māori and other indigenous peoples. So that was, I guess, a draft is what you're saying, a working document to be included in a science curriculum as to why Maturanga Māori was going to be included. These 7 academics and scientists said basically science has no cultural aspect. And in the letter they talk about, ancient Islam, and they talked about India, and they talked about the various parts of the world that have added to the science, I was going to say rhetoric, but knowledge we have now. And it doesn't, in its purest sense, I guess they're saying, it's neither white nor brown or whatever. And so they showed an opposition to, I guess, the wording of that, talking about how science was used as a rationale for colonization. Is that a fair summation as you got it, George?
Yeah, I mean, the wording was from just a very non-consequential internal working document about, they incorrectly say that it is going to be part of a new NCA course. But nonetheless, the central idea behind it is really that a science course should also involve the history of science and the philosophy of science, right, rather than science itself. And I guess that's the issue I would have with the so-called listener 7, is that they seem, they're defending science, and I'm not too sure from discussion about the historical context of science as a tool of colonization, or a conversation around what Māori knowledge brings to the science curriculum or whatever, right? And, again, based on a recommendation that wasn't even really part of an NCA course to begin with. I just feel like it's sort of it's sort of this cultural, warfare or moral panic over something that isn't even threatening their, whatever they call their science, right? Isn't even threatening their discipline of science. In other words, it's a sort of made up moral panic. And there's all these other layers to the story that involve Siouxsie Wiles as well that we can
which we'll get into.
Well.
I think it's also interesting to put in there as well from that same letter. They do talk about sort of, we call it Māori knowledge. They do say Indigenous knowledge is critical for the preservation and perpetuation of culture and local practices, and plays key roles in management and policy. However, in the discovery of empirical universal truth, it falls far short of what we can define as science itself. I mean, I'm not to defend what they're saying, but it sounds like they're being purists, and they say if you can't test it and repeat that test and get the same results, it's not science. It's repeatable, it's evidence-based. And what you're saying, George, and I think perhaps what Siouxsie was saying is there is also a story to be told around science. And part of that is part of the New Zealand story around it. I read somewhere else that they were talking about myths and legends, how myths and legends don't have any part to play in a science curriculum. I haven't seen evidence whether there were going to be things about taniwha, my word, or something included in it or not. But it sounds like there's a group of people, and there were Māori amongst the people of that listener 7. It wasn't a bunch of redneck, and they're academics, and let's be honest, academics, George, normally do swing pretty heavily left as well. So it's not necessarily your kind of, News Talk ZB overnight listeners who are writing that letter. It is academics, and it does involve some Māori on there as well. And I wonder if it's one of those conversations going past each other where some purists are saying this is what science is, And other people are saying, well, but there's a story behind silence. We want to tell the story. Chewy, you should jump in because we've taken all the...
Yeah, look, I am 100% a layperson that studied broadcasting, and that was about as sciencey as I ever got. But look, my understanding of I guess scientific process has come up with an idea, test it, see if it works, and it's repeatable. And that's basically, you boil everything down to that. And I think what this is kind of, New Zealand traditionally has brought a lot of its a European focus to everything that it's done. And of course, Europeans colonized New Zealand, and we brought our superior ways of thinking and doing things. And you know, these people, we've rescued them and we've improved their lives, and there's nothing of value of their culture that we should really keep. And that has been the way of New Zealand for a long time. And now we're coming to a point where some people are going, well, hang on, there's an enormous amount of knowledge that has come from Māori and Pacific people, and they've done it in a different way from everybody else. You can't tell me a culture can navigate the largest ocean on earth just from luck. You know, it's science and it's knowledge, and it's had a way of being passed down. And I think the Eurocentric point of view has been very, very quick to dismiss that as luck or superstition. I mean, you look at stuff in the Bible that has definitely a scientific root. The way that we're going to communicate this out to people is in the way of a myth or a fable or a story.
Right.
But the key thing is, don't do this thing, you'll die. You know,
like you're talking about, for example, when it said avoid some of these foods, for example, and that's because some of those foods were, if they weren't cooked properly, they could cause massive amounts of issues for you as a human being. And maybe it was told
or hygiene stuff. Even it's a way of passing down knowledge. And I think we keep on seeing things. I remember seeing a story about some archaeologists down south from here, down in the Catlins, finding food storage pits and going, oh, this is amazing. Like, we'd never had any concept that Māori were cultivating this far south. And local Māori were going, yeah, we knew that we did because we have these stories. You know, Māori culture is a word of mouth culture. Their stories are retained.
I guess, as with everything, the devil's in the detail, isn't it? Because we don't actually know what the end item would have been, so we can't really comment. You know, if they were, I mean, like, I'm being silly on purpose, but if they were talking about the evidence for taniwha, we'd all go, "Don't be fucking stupid. That's not supposed to be in a science thing." But if they were talking about, you know, stories behind why they do that, because it's got to do with the river and how it moves and that kind of stuff, then that's a way of looking at it. I was just thinking, even within the European culture, we all know the story, quote unquote, around Alexander Fleming leaving out the piece of bread and getting molding and him discovering penicillin. There's a story behind that about the penicillin and the bread, and which is not the science part of it, but it's the story. So it's interesting, George, you and I talked about this before the show, and I wasn't quite clear, but I'm sort of clearer now in my head after we've talked. We do need to move on to the second part of this, though, as well, which is actually what happened with the Media Council. So Siouxsie Wiles wrote a piece in stuff.co.nz, and the piece was titled, in fact, I'll bring up the piece because it's still on stuff.co.nz, albeit redacted based on the complaint. It was entitled "Academics Use Your Mana to Aid Colleagues and Not Fight Them." There was a line in the story, and it was talking about, you know, supporting Māori and supporting, you know, having more representation. And there was a line in it that was taken out, and the line was, as a part of the sentences, even though it's been taken out, it's still there as an addendum. Astonishingly now, well, actually, we've missed a step, haven't we, George? We probably need to explain that there was a response by some that caused some of the listener 7 to want to take this a bit further, which then responded in the university, sending out lawyers' letters to some staff as a part of a process they had to follow. Yeah. So they had to follow the process of making contact with some people through lawyers, whether that's policy or law, I'm not sure, but that's the way the Auckland University does it. And from those letters going out, this line was included in Siouxsie's original article, which is then the case before the Media Council. Is that? I think that's clear. This line has now been taken out. Siouxsie said, astonishingly, some are now, this is some are the listener 7, are now intimidating junior colleagues with lawyers' letters. Now, Stuff has taken that out and has actually stated clearly these, quote, lawyers' letters were sent by the University of Auckland following a Privacy Act request made by 2 of the listener 7 letter writers. So the university sent them, not the academics. The way it's been written, I think it's fair to say many would think the way Siouxsie wrote it was that the academics were sending the lawyers' letters. Whereas the academics applied to the university followed their practice, and part of their practice included notifying these people through lawyers. That's pretty clear, yeah, George?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. We've got to talk it out. We've got to get it around. Now, that was then, there was a Media Council complaint made, and yesterday the findings were released that the media complaint was upheld. The Media Council has found the statement, astonishingly, some are now intimidating junior colleagues with lawyers' letters, was inaccurate and required immediate and clear correction. The Media Council ruling can be seen if you want it. Because part of the other complaint was the Media Council said that this article went up December 20th and it wasn't corrected until December 31st. So there's also a period of time that Stuff left that, what the Media Council is calling an incorrect statement, up and didn't remove it quickly enough. So, little bit sort of litigious, and round we go. I contacted Siouxsie and I asked Siouxsie if she was interested in coming on and talking about this today, and she said no, but she gave me a statement. So I asked her if she wanted to come on, and I think it's important for us to share Siouxsie's statement, and I don't know if anywhere else has got a statement from Siouxsie about the decision. Siouxsie says this: I'm disappointed with the ruling, as we sent the Media Council 2 of the letters sent by the professor's lawyers to the uni demanding the junior colleagues' emails. So the statement released about the case is misleading, as it is written to imply the only lawyer involved was the university's, which is simply not true. Even in this statement, though, from Siouxsie, it says that the council too had letters sent to the university, because it says by the professor's lawyers to the university, and then the university sent lawyers' letters to the junior colleagues. So I don't know. Even according to this up in here, it's the academics, the listener 7, the people who followed this up. It says clearly here they didn't send lawyers' letters to the junior colleagues. They sent them to the university. And again, I wonder if it's just a bit, they're all missing each other and seeing what's going on. I've got more information from Siouxsie as well, who I was messaging this morning, but you guys are welcome to jump in on this and share any thoughts you've got first.
It sounds like a mess. A big old mess. Just looking at some of the comments in the chat, I kind of agree with this, that this sort of thing, when it pops up, can really be like a rallying cry to some really nasty people. Again, I think George, you mentioned culture war.
That comment there?
Yeah, critical race theory. And it was seen here that's just gone bananas in the US. And I think there is a potential for a very similar thing to happen here. You know, European culture is being pushed out by Maori nonsense.
Yeah, I think that's definitely what we're seeing here with the Media Council rulings and that sort of thing, is that these become personal vendettas and sort of almost wars between Twitter personalities or column writers for the platform, getting their daily kind of fix of writing about pink lady woman who pink haired woman.
First of all, it's a woman, so I'm angry. Second of all, pink hair. Wow.
I mean, that's unfair on my part. I'm sort of caricaturing this whole thing, but you know, it feels like there was these small technicalities with how the university dealt with things that were sort of blown out of proportion, and then on Siouxsie's part, to then go beyond the debate at hand about science classes and Māori knowledge, or science also including the historical context of science and that sort of thing, go beyond that and sort of make these accusations of intimidation and go beyond that debate, also doesn't help the situation, right? It means we get into these complicated roundabout things with the media council and this sort of thing. But you're right, the original point, the critical race theory stuff that was just totally cooked up by conservative think tanks in America to get voters afraid, basically get them scared of the lefties under the bed. It is a similar sort of thing going on here.
And look, to echo this idea of who is blowing this up, if you actually search this now, what you'll find is friend of the show, David Farrar, is on Kiwi Blog, which is typically a conservative right-wing thing. It's on whatever that's BFD or whatever it is, which I think is Cameron Slater's new one. I found it through The Platform, which is Sean Plunkett's one, who's even though he claims to not have any bias in his new idea, a right-wing. So the people who are writing opinion pieces on it all seem to be on the right and doing that. Let me just read as well. I won't read the whole thing, but I after that quote that I put up came through from Siouxsie, and I asked her permission to use it, and she said yes. I then rewrote her and I said, well, one more question. If that's the case, as you've just said, why did the media council rule against you? What if you're right now in your response now, why have you had the ruling against you? And I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's quite long, but and also there's probably some things in here that if the media council are going to say boo to that, they might say boo to some of these if I was to read them out. But she does say, no idea. This is the point. Though they, media council, all clearly decided there was just one interpretation of the sentence in question. And I have to say, with the greatest of respect to Siouxsie, I think there probably is just one interpretation of that sentence. Astonishingly, some are now intimidating junior colleagues with lawyers' letters. I mean, without saying anyone's right or wrong of this, I think it was probably a bit of a poorly written sentence. George, you've watched me, how carefully I am to write, what's going to come up in the show and that to try and be as clear as possible. And when we put something in written word, if it's not 100% clear, if there is any ambiguity, then you lose control of your own narrative. So that's a little part of this as well.
Yeah, because effectively she gave her enemies the opportunity to lodge the media council complaint, right?
Yeah.
And then again, as I said, it becomes not about the debate any longer.
Yeah, and you put that on top of people are out for Siouxsie. There's the photograph on the beach during lockdown, and there's, as you say, probably some implicit bias against quote unquote female, quote unquote the appearance of someone who's looking very kind of atypically left wing and sort of progressive. I'm not sure if she is or isn't, but the look about it, you kind of go, you line all these things up and you go, you can see why people are having a crack. Not that it's appropriate or fair or necessarily, but I'm just saying they all sort of line up to be having a go. So that's where they're at. I guess when you're a public figure, though, look, when I used to work in a much more public profile place than this, I had letters delivered to my door. I had death threats. I had all sorts of stuff. And when you're out there, I'm not, again, obviously not saying it's good or bad. In fact, I'm saying it's bad, but you open yourself up to all sorts of criticism and all sorts of commentary. You kind of become public fodder on some area. And if someone gets the bee in the bonnet about you for one thing, like a photo on a beach during lockdown, then they never let it go. And that becomes the rationale and reason for all their future criticisms couched in some other way. And that's
people just don't let that stuff go. And I feel an enormous amount of sympathy for Siouxsie, because she's done some amazing work around our COVID response and being a visible woman in science and just explaining things so well. She's a lightning rod for some of the New Zealand internet's vilest people, as far as I can see.
Here's one last comment before we shoot off, boys. Just talking about the idea of having Māori, and I say Māori stories, Māori knowledge in a scientific role. A point could be made about herbal and natural cures, the real ones, this person's saying, are marginalized by Western science because there's no money in it. You know,
Yep.
I think there's some validity there. We're not going to get into a debate about what those herbal and natural cures are, especially in this age of COVID, because with some of those thoughts comes misinformation about other herbal and natural results, which aren't accurate. Like the like what I read the other day on someone's Facebook page about hydrogen peroxide, inhaling that to help kill COVID. Oh. That's sort of stuff.
Well, if you kill the host, you probably kill the virus.
True. So dead people, there's no more COVID. All right, lads. Anything else you want to wrap up with? Bounce off the back of there?
Nah, it's all good.
Thank you to people who are with us right now still. Thank you for joining in. It's been an interesting show today. We'll be making some clips today. They'll be up on the internet probably within the next couple of hours. Remember, #ShareOurShit. I got to make one of those banners that says #ShareOurShit, because we do want to get our stuff out there, and the best way you can help and support us right now is to share our stuff around. We'll have that Tom Mutch interview up there as well. It's probably this conversation around Siouxsie and that as well to do with the Media Council. I always think, as I just said, the devil's in the detail. And for me, I struggle to go, this should not be in a curriculum when I've got a headline. I need to know what's the context of it under the headline before I decide whether I would support it being in a curriculum, in a document, in an official thing or not. And because we've got that headline, as it said, about colonization, it feels like some people have got their knickers in a twist over the idea that science might be something that oppresses people. But if we talk about, scientific stories and the stories surrounding science, maybe again, that original statement in that working document was worded poorly, and it could have been worded better. But that's what a working document is. You go through and figure it out and figure out a better way to mention it. Anyway. All right, team. Last words from anyone? Anything you want to share?
I'm good.
All right. Hey, Chewy, thanks for jumping in today.
Yeah, no worries, man.
And we got you again tomorrow, I think.
Absolutely.
And George, thanks for your work today. It was a different one today with George did a lot of the background work, especially on that last story and also the supermarket one. So I really appreciate the background producing and stuff you did there, George. And for everyone watching and supporting us and wanting to get involved, we appreciate you. Share our shit. Head to the website you see down below there, which is our YouTube page. It's a studio page. It has multiple content options on it, including podcast, the DOC podcast, but also this and some other bits and bobs as well. And follow me personally on Twitter as a way you'll get the clips. I always put the clips on Twitter. And then share our shit and help us get the word out there and help us build and grow. And other than that, thank you everybody for joining us. And we will see you tomorrow morning around 11 a.m. Hooroo!